go ahead and get started. Um, Thanks for coming. This session today was optional, but we did just want to provide some resources for you in terms of knowing what to look out for when you're booking your international flights. My name is Jill. I'm the logistics coordinator in the office. So I've worked a lot with flights in the past in my experience. So that's kind of why I'm leading this today. So via your email and also uploaded to your application page at abroad.stanford.edu, you've received information on our recommended flights. So in most cases, this is going to be the flight that your Stanford faculty is taking. It's also the flight around which any ground transportation in your host country is going to be arranged. So any pickups from the airport will be arranged to pick up the group at that designated time. Because these are faculty flights, they typically originate in Birmingham, but our goal is to route them through Atlanta, since Atlanta is a major Southeast hub. And because of us wanting to route through Atlanta, just for the most convenience of the most students, we use Delta Airlines, which their hub is also in Atlanta. So you, like I said, you should have received an email from our director, Jennifer Lackey, about flights. The only programs that have not received that so far are the Caribbean Field Methods program, because we're waiting on some information from the faculty member, and then the Stanford and London Fall program. And that's just a function of that program being a little chronologically later than the others. So when you're thinking about whether or not you want to follow the recommended flight, there are some things you'll want to consider. So if you're traveling from a different part of the US that's not convenient to Atlanta, maybe it doesn't make sense to route through Atlanta with the group. Maybe there's a nonstop from your home city that you're coming from. If you're traveling earlier than the group or extending your travel to remain abroad after your program's conclusion, then in this case, the recommended flight, at least all of the segments of the recommended flight, may not make sense for you. And then some students will wind up traveling on a different airline, especially we have some students whose family members work for an airline. So if your parent is a pilot with American, you're probably going to get some free travel there with Americans. You're not going to want to use Delta. So in that sort of situation, it may make sense not to use the recommended flight. So just these are some things to think about when you're deciding whether or not you're going to use the recommended flight that we sent you. If you do decide to use a recommended flight, our flights, and even if you're not using the recommended flight, you could still use CV Travel, but our flights for our faculty are booked through CV Travel. You're welcome to also contact them and use them. It would be probably a simplified process, just because our travel agent knows what flight your faculty is already on, and she's really great to work with. So one benefit that I can see to using her is if there's a circumstance where your flight's delayed significantly or canceled unexpectedly, you can contact her and she can help you to get rebooked on the next flight. Whereas, if you have booked directly with the airline, you may be just waiting in line at the counter with everyone else who's waiting to be rebooked. If you booked with Shelly, it's possible that you could be calling her on the phone while you're waiting in that line to get rebooked and get rebooked sooner. So Shelly is her name. Her email is shellyp@cvtravel.com, and that would be in the email that Jennifer Lackey sent out to you as well. If you choose to work with CV Travel, you will need in the initial email. Okay, so it's not represented in this room, but we have like 300 something ish students going abroad, May, summer, fall, right? So what will happen is Shelly will get these emails that say, hey, it's Jill. I would like you to book my flight. literally that gets her no information at all, right? So, because she doesn't have a list of our students either. So if you do decide to reach out to her, please make sure that you're including all of this information. It will just help the process be more efficient both for you and for her, because otherwise it's going to be a bunch of back and forth of, you know, getting this information. So I'm going to upload a PDF of this presentation to your application pages, so you'll have this bulleted list of what you need to include. So your full name exactly as it appears on your passport. Please open your passport, take a look, make sure it matches exactly. If you make your flight booking and your name doesn't match what's on your passport, excuse me, you may be denied boarding at the gate. So that's something we don't want to happen to you. So please just make sure that you are giving your name exactly as it is written on your passport. You'll want to include your date of birth, the name of your program, your professor's name. So that way she can make sure that she's putting you on the same recommended flight that your faculty member is on. Your preferred U.S. departure city. So obviously if you're from, you're from Memphis, right? You're probably not going to want to depart from Birmingham. You're probably going to want to depart from Memphis, meet everyone in Atlanta, and then take the same transatlantic flight. So she would need to know that information. Your dates of travel, I would just put your dates regardless of whether you plan to deviate from the program, or you can just say, I would like you to match the program dates, but it might just be clearer to put your exact dates of travel. But especially if you're planning to, most of the May programs, for example, like you may not be able to travel earlier, but if you're planning to remain in country for a little while, after the program ends, you'll want to communicate that and when you want to come back. And then any other special requests that you have that are related to your deviation, you would just want to put in that initial email. That way she has full information when she's looking for an estimate for you. Okay, so if you decide not to use CV Travel, which is absolutely another option, we do recommend that you book directly with the airline that you're choosing to use. As I mentioned, majority of our flights are on Delta. So you would go to delta.com and book. I really strongly discourage you from using Expedia, Kayak, Priceline, those types of third-party vendors, because it's really hard to modify your flight. It's hard if something happens and you need to change your flight to get a refund, because it's just harder to get in touch with those companies. Like I personally have done this in the past when I didn't know quite as much about travel, and let's just say it's not a fun process. So again, it may cost you a couple more dollars, but if you book directly with the airline versus one of those discount travel websites, but in a lot of cases it's going to be worth it. So to get started with a booking directly from the airline, you will need your laptop, a credit card, a copy of your passport bio page so that you can make sure you're getting that information off of your passport correct, and then your recommended flight details so that you know that you're booking flights that will arrive in country when you're scheduled to arrive. Speaking of arrival times, travel dates, etc., please pay very close attention to your arrival date to your host country versus your departure date from the US. So a lot of flights, especially if you're going to Europe, will depart the US in the evening and they arrive in Europe. Japan would be the same case. They arrive the next day, right? So if you need to be in Heathrow on May 3rd at 10 a.m. I'm just throwing random days, times, airports out there. Then you would need to leave on May 2nd to make sure that you're there for May 3rd. So just pay really close attention to that. We've had students that have been tripped up by that in the past, because if you've only ever flown domestic flights, those usually occur within the same day, right? So just make sure you're paying close attention to both of those things. And that should be also in your recommended flight details when it's departing and when it's arriving. Okay, so another thing you'll really want to pay close attention to is the airport code. Cities have multiple airports, right? And our ground transportation is going to be arranged to the airport that recommended flight is traveling to. So there's a 3-letter code that each airport has. Just pay attention to that code. Make sure you're booking to that code. So for example, London has 2 airports. Heathrow, which is basically your larger international airport, but there's also Gatwick, which is outside of the city. And a lot of times there are like cheaper flights related to Gatwick, so you might see that, but don't take that, because you're going to be like not in the right place when the coach comes to get you. Madrid has 2 airports, Dublin, Paris. Paris has, our flights are going into Charles de Gaulle, but Orly is also a large airport in Paris. So just make sure you know which airport you're supposed to be going to. And if you're going to Spain, that's the Madrid airport. It's really kind of cool, futuristic looking. Okay, connecting flights. So when you're looking at options for your flight, a lot of times, unless you are from Atlanta and you're going to just book direct from Atlanta to your host city, a lot of times you're going to have a connection. So pay attention to your connecting flights. You want to have plenty of time to make your flights. And I would encourage you to consider, if you have an option for less stops versus more stops, even if less stops costs you more, maybe it's worth it, because the more planes you are on, right, that's the more chances for you to be delayed. That's the more chances for your luggage to get lost. So that's just something to consider. If you are passing through border control, you want to have at least 2.5 to 3 hours. And I know that sounds like a lot of time, but by the time you arrive in country, you go through customs, you go through border control, you collect your bags to go through customs and border control, and then you have to go recheck your bags, go back through security. It's a whole process. So just keep that in mind. So for example, if you're flying, this is particularly relevant on the return flight. So if you're flying, let's say, suppose you found a flight back from Tokyo that takes you through Detroit, and you only have an hour before the Detroit to Birmingham flight. Like, you only have an hour in Detroit. That's not enough time, right? So making sure that you have enough time to make that connection. Don't set yourself up for a situation where you're having to go find a hotel in Detroit because the last flight to Birmingham has left because you only gave yourself an hour. All right. So when you arrive in the host country, if you're going to London, this is Tom. He's our London, UK Director of Operations. And this is actually where he will meet you in Heathrow. So if you arrive on the recommended flight that the faculty is on, you will be able to utilize the coach service that's included with your program, or other, I say coach service, different programs have different pickup options, right? So if you're, it may be that you go as a group and get on public transport, but whatever that case is, you will be able to travel with the group to the beginning of your program. If you're not taking the recommended flight, so if you're selecting a different flight, maybe from a different airline, or you're departing from a different city and it doesn't make sense to route through Atlanta, try to take a flight that arrives earlier than the group so that you can be in the airport and then join them there to take advantage of any ground transportation. So if for some reason you have decided not to take the recommended flight and you're delayed independently, that would be up to you to join the group. If the whole group on the recommended flight is delayed, then it's likely that we would be able to rearrange the transportation. So if you take the recommended flight, then that's one other thing that you can sort of consider as a bonus of that, right? Okay, I kind of just talked about this. Also, if you're on the recommended flight, right, but then you missed your recommended flight, which we've had a rash of students missing their flight in the past couple of years, and I would say it's due to unpredictability at the airport. So we'll remind you of this in health and safety and in pre-departure emails as well, but you do want to arrive at least 3 hours early to the airport. I know I talked about your layover time being about 3 hours. You want to have that same amount of time when you arrive to the airport to check in. 8 times out of 10, you may just be sitting there for an extra hour and a half. But if you're in that 20%, and you don't make it, then it creates a really stressful and what can be expensive situation because the airline may charge you to rebook. So just keeping that in mind. But if you don't make your flight, your departure flight, and you're not on it, you would be responsible for getting yourself to the program start. I would say no matter what, if you're on the recommended flight or if you're on your own flight, have a plan. Just have an idea of what you would do in case you missed that flight, right? In case you missed the group transportation. Okay, how do I plan to get myself to the group? Would Uber be easily available? Maybe looking up how you would take a taxi from the airport if you needed to. Just having that information in your mind in advance so that if that situation comes up, you're well prepared to deal with it. Okay, some other tips for when you're booking your flight. Make sure you understand the differences between fares and inclusions, especially if you're booking directly with the airline website. So if you book a basic economy fare, maybe it doesn't include any checked bags, right? Or seat assignment. So by the time you add a checked bag and add a seat assignment, maybe it makes sense to just buy, a main cabin flight. Usually with CV travel, those flights do include between 1 and 3 checked bags. That should be on your estimate that you receive from Shelley if you choose to use CV travel. So I would keep that cost in mind when you're looking at that pricing, right? So keep in mind if it includes checked bags or not. By the way, I say it may include 1 to 3 checked bags. I absolutely encourage you not to bring 3 checked bags, even if they're included. That's like, you're going to be so sad about trying to haul all that around. But also we would encourage you avoid booking a non-refundable flight. I wanted to say that correctly, because you want to make sure that if for some reason something happens, you need to switch your flight to a different day or just something unexpected comes up. And I know it's like, what can happen? But like working in this field, as long as I have, I've seen a lot of things happen where students have had to change their flight. So you just don't want to be in a situation where you have an exorbitant financial penalty because you've had to change something related to your flight. So it's just often not going to be worth those few dollars you may save on the front end. Okay, so just like coming to campus for school, like it's your responsibility to get there to where your course is located. So I encourage you to follow all of the instructions that are provided both by us and your faculty leaders to make sure that you are arriving on time, checking into your accommodations when you're supposed to, and all of those things. I can't think of any cases where you would be really allowed to check into your accommodations early or stay late. So just keep that in mind if you're planning personal travel before or after your program, that you will be responsible for your own accommodations and everything before the program start date. Okay, so what's next? And some of you may have already booked, but if you haven't, go ahead and book your flight, basing your arrival and departure on the recommended flight, especially the arrival. And if you plan to work with CV Travel, so the way that process works is you're going to email her with all of those things in that bulleted slide, right? And then she's going to respond to you with an estimate. Her response with an estimate is not mean that you have a flight booked, right? That means that you need to respond to say, yes, I accept this estimate, or actually, is there another option because of XYZ item? Make sure when she sends that to you too, like check that stuff that I was telling you to check, like check to make sure you have a long enough connection, right? So, but if you just like get the estimate and you're like, okay, I'm done, then you're going to be really sad when you show up to the airport because you're not going to flight. So, I can't really emphasize that one strongly enough because that has also happened. And then make sure you submit your flight itinerary via the questionnaire that's on your application at abroad.stanford.edu. We would like to see that no later than March 18th, because we want to make sure that there's availability on the flight, the recommended flight that you want. We can't 100% guarantee, but booking it sooner rather than later does help to ensure that you're able to get on the flight that you want. This is all I have to say. Does anyone have questions? Jennifer, do you have anything to add?
No, anything to add? I'd emphasize that picture of people getting off the coach with all those bags were probably semester students taking lots of things, and even they probably had taken too much. So if you're on a short term, don't take that much.
Yeah, that was fall 22.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Mm-hmm. I watched some of them look real sad as they load that stuff. Flights, many flights.
Yeah. And it is important that we see your itinerary, even if you're not on that faculty flight, if you're coming from somewhere else, or you're going to already be in your host city for a week before your program arrives. Us knowing what your travel plan is will help us make sure the arrangements from the airport to the program are what they need to be. So. Yeah, you would have to find your own accommodations, which we have students doing. Some students are like, I'm going to spend a week in London before my program starts, which is absolutely fine. We will tell you the time on the start date to come straight to the Daniel House. They'll be arranging to pick up the arriving students that morning, getting them there. So you will not be able to come to the house until that afternoon when everyone's arriving. But we will tell you, you'll get all that specific information by your program.
Also, if anyone's doing a semester in London, and you plan to arrive early or depart late, you'll need to run those travel plans by Joe Burkhart, just to make sure there are some visa considerations.
This is true.
If you're doing a May or a summer program, those programs don't require visas.
Mhm.
So
I don't think no. World Strides would have said, I think by
World
now.
Strides will advise.
Yeah.
So the only thing to be aware of, I guess, is if you're doing the Germany or Spain program where you're staying, so you can only be in certain countries in Europe that are part of what's known as the Schengen zone. You can only be there for 90 days. More than 90 days would be a violation of your tourist visa, and it could impact your ability to re-enter those countries in the future if you overstay. So if you're, doing like a longer program and you're like, oh, I'm just gonna go and stay for an extra month and a half, like just maybe make sure you're considering that.
Do we have any affiliate students? Students that are doing an affiliate program? Are you doing Chest Punk? Yeah, so they will be picking you up. And we will get that information to you from Kristen. But I just want to make sure there wasn't anybody like just going off to Costa Rica for the summer that we should talk about.
Okay, well, so I work part-time in the office. I'm in office Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you start booking your flight and you're like, okay, I have a question. I didn't know in the session I had a question, but now I have a question. You can feel free to send me an email. We could even set a time to come by. I'm happy to sit with you while you book and help you through the process. So just whatever, if you need any help. If it's not a Tuesday or Thursday, you may want to email the office. Although I do monitor my emails on other days of the week, but I also have another job. So you may just you may get a quicker response unless it's a Tuesday or Thursday. But I'm happy to set up a time to meet with anybody that has questions. One more thing that I didn't mention during the presentation, but I will mention now, is I had a parent a couple of days ago call asking for the recommended flight for their student. We don't give like flight itinerary information out to anyone other than the student. So please share that information with any family members that you would like to know what that recommended flight is. If you have a parent that's helping you book, please share that information with them directly. If they call our office, we just won't be able to get that out. So yeah, just try to keep them in the loop if you can. Because we're gonna tell you all the things. Whoever you want, all the things. But we want that to be up to you, right? Thanks for coming. I'll stick around for any questions after